Okay, so what was the differences between the French and the Spanish colonization of America? We learned about this in yesterday's PowerPoint. Obviously, the French were a lot more accepting of the natives. They worked with the natives rather than enslaving them. And they also did not force Catholicism on the natives, while the Spanish was much more like ruthless, if you want to say. They tried to force their practices onto them and make everyone like adopt Catholicism immediately. And they also like forced them to work for them rather than working with them. Okay, so we're still doing the European colonizations of America. So since Columbus, we have the Spanish explorers who are sailing to America for very different reasons. Again, a lot of them wanted to spread Christianity and gain wealth or win fame. And again, we think of the 3 Gs: gold, God, and glory. Oh, I want to go back. We don't skip the slide. No, we didn't. You. Okay, dreams and riches. So this is a primary source, and we're supposed to be like learning what the motivations or what motivated some English to describe America in such a positive light. So it says, I tell thee gold is more plentiful than copper is with us. Why, man, all their dripping pans and their chamber pots are pure gold. And as for rubies and diamonds, they gone forth of holy days and gather them by the seashore to hang on their children's coats and in their capes. So again, as we mentioned last class, like America was not this whatsoever. The colonists were starving. They were dying of disease. They were dying of Native American Indian attacks. And no one was having a lot of fun. But why are they still advertising America as like this wonderful place to go? You want to take a minute to think. So again, as I said, coming to America was a money-making venture. A lot of the joint stock companies had who had purchased this land or like agreed to help fund these colonies wanted to make money. So there were investors and owners of these new colonies, and again, they stood to make money off the settlement, and they wanted to make a profit, and like they were putting profit over safety. And this worked. So like these like propaganda pieces worked, and by 1623, approximately over 5,000 English and other Europeaners had migrated to Virginia. Yet the lives that they encountered were so bad, nearly 4,000 of these settlers died within the short time of arriving in this country, or in the colonies. Okay, hopefully this plays.
I've always loved the story of people coming from Scandinavia or from Northern Europe with flaxseed sewn in their pockets, or grain from great crops that they grow there, and they brought them here to start what became the greatest agricultural economy in the world.
Tobacco is the leading edge of colonial commerce. It's a cash crop. It produces tremendous value in exchange for significant but bearable investments of land and labor. And the demand for tobacco is immense. It's like a drug. If you're thinking about tobacco, think cocaine.
The amusing thing is that it actually took quite a number of years to establish the legitimacy of tobacco because King James I disapproved of the use of tobacco. He thought it was unhealthy.
One of the things about growing tobacco is it's labor intensive. And for a lot of reasons, it was difficult to maintain a white labor force, a free labor force, to do the kind of grunt labor that tobacco culture requires. For one thing, it's too easy for white indentured servants to run away. And so you begin importing Africans, initially as indentured servants, that is, as people who are bound for a time to serve a master. But it soon becomes more convenient, economically speaking, to hold these people as slaves.
There was too much land to work when they came to the colonies, so they brought the slaves over to do that work. And they didn't want to pay them. So how did they rationalize it? They go, oh, we don't have to pay them because they're black. It's genius on one hand, but it's also insane.
To be able to make Tobacco Road and not pay for the service made America competitive in the world economic market, because you have not only low wage workers, you have no wage workers. So now you can compete and produce product without having to pay the labor cost of it. So it is a good business venture, aside from the questions of human rights and racism. It's just good business.
Okay, so as it turns out, the one thing, or like the one crop that could save Virginia was not even the crop that they could eat. It was a cash crop. John Rolfe introduced tobacco from the West Indies in 1613. John Rolfe is later the man who will marry Pocahontas a year later. And this cash crop that was going to save Virginia was tobacco. It was a plant that was native to the Western Hemisphere, but had never been known in Europe up to this point. So by 1618, 50,000 pounds of tobacco was being exported a year. And in 1640, Virginia and Maryland were exporting nearly 3 million pounds of tobacco a year. So settlers began moving out of Jamestown to farm tobacco. The Virginia Company, again, who was one of the purchasers of, or like a joint stock company, one of the founders, funders, whatever you want to call it, of these colonies, started to lure English in with the promise of 50 acres of land. So the cultivation quickly exhausted the soil, and this forced many farmers outland into Native American lands. So because tobacco requires a huge deal of hand labor, the Virginia Company instituted what they called headright grants, which were grants or awards of large plantations on the condition that these recipients or grant recipients transported workers from England at their own cost. So between 1619 and 1624, more than 4,500 English settlers arrived, many with their families, in order to grow tobacco. So an indentured servant is someone who provides labor. These are people who had to work for a master for a period of time, usually about 7 years, and their master would pay for their voyage over to the colonies, and they would give them food and shelter, and sometimes at the end of their contract, they got a little slice of land. Historians often estimate that between 100,000 and 150,000 people came to America as an indentured servant, and most of these people who were coming over were 18 to 22 years old. Okay, the Royal Colony. So after 15 years, the Virginia colony still faced some serious problems. One of it was corruption of the local officials who were defrauding all these shareholders. Second was there was still a very large death rate. 3, the Native Americans' relations grew worse and worse as colonists began to take over their land, and a 10-year war will start very soon. And then lastly, the Virginia Company actually ends up having to file for bankruptcy. So King James took away the colony's charter and shut it down in 1624 because of all these problems. And in addition to a royal governor, Virginia also now has a legislator, or like a lawmaking body. The legislature was made up of representatives from the colony. They're pronounced, it's the House of Burgesses. And because representatives were called Burgesses, the assembly itself is later going to be called the House of Burgesses. And this is significant, and it has been a question on like your tests in years past, because the House of Burgesses was the first limited self-government in the English colonies. That's it.